Hi, everybody. We are very honored to have a presentation today. I would like to introduce Ryan Majola, who actually did a critical roles in writing this research paper for EOX. We are very, very honored to take this research project. And today we're very honored to also present what we found. Having said that, maybe we'll start with a very quick introductions of Ryan. Maybe Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. I'm seeing a couple familiar faces from RMEOC. My name is Ryan. I'm from Denver, Colorado, born and raised in Broomfield, and I was lucky enough to contribute to this awesome research project, which we're super proud to bring to you today.
That's awesome. All right. Since actually we have a lot of things to cover, we'll spend about 30 minutes doing our presentations and open up Q&A. Sounds great. So let's just start with the slides. So who we are. RMUC, the mission of RMUC is to build a more just and sustainable economy through employee ownership. And we actually have various employee ownership programs. We work on EO conversions. We work with the companies to convert into employee ownership companies. We also work on co-op incubation for marginalized communities. One example is a drivers co-op for rideshare drivers here in Colorado is our co-op incubation project. And we are also incubating home care cooperative as well in rural and urban Colorado. We also work on social cooperative program to create a new category of cooperatives for marginalized communities. We also have research and policy advocacy to make sure that there are more research happening such as this to share knowledge so that we can advance employee ownership. So the big question about sort of the employee ownership trust is that why matters, right? I think we are in a so critical moment right now. If you look at the civil tsunami problems, right? We keep hearing about what's happening. There are about 2.7 million business owners who are actually baby boomers. So, however, 60% of these baby boomers mm, don't have any active planning. What this means is that there's a big risk of closed business right now and in the future. Between 2000 and 2018, more than 1,200 business, which employ more than 52,000 people, closed their doors. So this is a big problem that we are facing right now. So EO, any kinds of sort of the EO business can be better. The other one is a rising inequality. As you know, between 1979 and 2021, the average income of the richest grew over 27 times faster than the income of the bottom 20% of the workers. And CEO compensation also had a skyrocket, right? 1,085% compared to 24% of middle class. So with this sort of the problem of rising inequality, what are we doing about that? Right. And all of this sort of the silver tsunami and the rising inequality problems perpetuate in a declining resilience, as more workers are displaced and are losing jobs. It's interesting to look at how actually American look at employee-owned businesses. This is just sort of the reports that we got. According to ESOP Association's data, 72% wants to work in a company owned by its employees. That's a really, really good sign for us, right? Again, I think employee-owned businesses is so critical and timely right now. So in the United States, there are three different models of employee ownership models. You might have heard about the employee ownership, employee stock ownership plan. That is a retirement plan, regulated by the federal law. And it happens to a lot of larger firms because of the very complex regulations and high costs to convert to ESOP. But there are over 6,400 ESOP companies in the United States, which is the largest sectors of employee-owned businesses. So this is very another good thing about ESOP is that it actually provide a very good federal tax advantages, including capital gain exemptions for the selling owners. Ryan will talk a little more about how actually we can create more policy like ESOP policy that we do have in the United States. Co-op is another good models. There are over 950 worker co-op here in the United States, growing rapidly, and it's really good for the business owners who care about democratic governance structures. Workers directly govern their business with the principles of a one person, one vote basis. Then there is a new employee ownership trust in the United States. Again, you can go back to sort of the histories. I read articles that actually the very first, ESOP, EOT was happening in 1920s, in the United States. But the modern EOT happens, since 2013 and 14. And there are a lot of amazing groups actually promoting employee ownership trust. It is actually a perpetual trust, meaning that it exists in perpetuity, right? So if you want to actually sell your business for a higher profit, perhaps it is not the right model for you. I can give you examples of the New Belgium brewing companies in Fort Collins. And that got sold. Why? Because again, employees of New Belgium wants to maximize the benefits. But EOT actually exists for current and future employees. So it's a very different kind of models. But especially if you focus on the mission, I think EOT will be a really good missions. So Ryan's, you will talk about, what exactly is a EOT?
Yes. So when sort of talking about like what exactly is an employee ownership trust, I think it's kind of easier to contrast like what it is and what it isn't. So a few things that it is that it's a type of purpose trust. It has no ascertainable beneficiary. And this just means that like there's someone who is enforcing the trust purpose and that the indirect beneficiaries of that trust are the employees. Um, the goal is to advance a purpose. As I said, the employees are indirect beneficiaries and not shareholders, like they would be in something like an ESOP. And it exists to benefit current and future employees. It's not like an ESOP where there's contributions, revaluations, and sort of management of cash flows annually, requiring all sorts of complex financial modeling. Employees are naked in, naked out. So it's not like a worker cooperative in that there's an initial contribution to the cooperative fund. And it's not a retirement plan. It's not an individual stock ownership plan, and it is not a buy-sell vehicle. It's really something that's supposed to be established with long-term vision, grounded and couched in certain purposes and pro-social goals. How the benefits flow to employees. I think this is what really makes an employee ownership trust a unique vehicle for workplace equity, is that it's typically used for profit sharing. This could look like cash bonuses, but it can also be channeled towards things like 401k contributions or other trust-defined mechanisms. In the full report and in the policy toolkit, I got the chance to speak with an employee ownership trust in Utah, Clay Gatto, and the way they use their trust is so interesting. They have a bunch of um, charitable donations built into their trust structure, education for their employees, and also just like a general fund that they can kind of utilize towards the betterment of their community, which is really something unique in this sphere. The high level formation process of a trust is as follows. So the seller owner will establish the intent and trust purpose in the form of a trust deed. That trust deed is legally formed. And then the arrangement for financing and purchasing of the shares of the company and the transfer of the shares of the assets of the business to the trust will be arranged. And the financing piece is another thing I wanted to mention in terms of flexibility of the employee ownership trust is the way that it's primarily financed is through something called seller financing, where the trust acquires all the shares on the day of the sale, and payment is made through, cents on the dollar of future profits. So, for example, there's an employee ownership trust in the East Coast. I think it's called Optimax Systems. They paid off their owner over the course of 15 years through chipping away at it by contributing 25 cents for every dollar of profit towards the repayment of the company's shares. So a lot of flexibility in financing there, which if you're interested in the details of that, we can talk more about. Then the trust acquires the company shares, and then the governance and benefit structures are then implemented. Key elements of a perpetual purpose trust. The key elements are a trust agreement, trust stewardship committee, a trust enforcer, and a corporate trustee. A trust agreement is the legal foundation of the trust. It defines the purpose, who benefits from it, and how decisions are governed. Uh, the Trust Stewardship Committee is a group that governs a business day to day, and they really make sure that the trust purpose is being adhered to. Members are legally responsible for carrying out the trust mission and are typically selected through a defined process, often through a vote by employees. The trust enforcer is an independent overseer who steps in to kind of resolve any disputes, kind of like that impartial third party. Um, and the corporate trustee is a neutral administrative trustee that holds and safeguards the assets. It doesn't really make business decisions, but it just makes sure that the assets are managed and distributed in ways that align with the purpose established in the deed. I'm sure that everyone's going to get really tired of us saying purpose, but like that is like the key focus of what makes EOTs so unique is that you can really center these things in purpose. So before getting to sort of like our policy recommendations, I think it's really important to understand the current policy environment that employee ownership trusts are operating within. And what you'll see is that EOTs are emerging out of a system that was largely designed for other ownership models, especially employee stock ownership plans. Uh, and that creates these real structural gaps, but also pretty big knowledge gaps, which is just as important. Um, so here is a list of federal policies, and as you can see, that they primarily just apply to ESOPs. At the federal, there's currently no employee ownership trust specific policy framework. All of these are built around employee stock ownership plans, which, with the exception of the Employee Ownership Representation Act, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. But these primarily center around, tax incentives, eligibility rules, and technical guidance. And we'll just go through these one by one to kind of provide a little more context. So IRC 1042 basically establishes that business owners who sell more than a 30% interest in their company to an ESOP can defer capital gains taxes as long as the proceeds are reinvested in qualified replacement property. This changes year to year. As far as like I'm concerned, this is the only stable form of like qualified replacement property I've seen is like government securities. That's neither here nor there. But essentially, this is just an incentive for C Corp owners to sell to ESOP trusts. ESOP trusts also receive pretty favorable treatment under IRC Section 501A, which exempts qualified trusts from federal income taxation. This means that the profits held at the trust level can be reinvested in the company or used for employee benefit without being eroded by federal income taxes. And the policy logic for these is clear. The federal government definitely recognizes ESOPs as advancing public goals like broad-based employee ownership and long-term wealth building. So there is a political appetite at the federal level for expansion of employee ownership policies. Another critical provision is IRC Section 1361, which allows ESOPs to be eligible shareholders of S corporations. And this is a big one we'll return to in the recommendations sections. But this is kind of why ESOP owned S corps are uh, extremely efficient operationally because the income can pass through to the ESOP trust, which is tax exempt, which effectively eliminates federal income tax at the corporate level. Um, and EOTs are excluded from this framework, meaning that, S corporation businesses are kind of structurally barred from choosing the EOT model, regardless of fit or preference. And the tax implications further incentivize one form of employee ownership that is better suited to some contexts, but not, certainly not all. And I think that's like kind of what we're going to get at with our policy recommendations is that, each form of employee ownership is situated, right? Like there's times and places for each of these types of models, but the way that the rules and the laws are written really kind of are geared towards ESOPs. The Employee Ownership Fairness Act just seeks to resolve some conflicts between uh, stock contributions and retirement plan contributions and limits established under ERISA and the IRC. And the Employee Ownership Representation Act has less to do with sort of incentivizing any one of these employee ownership structures, and it's more about governance and inclusion at the governance at the level of governance. And this proposal just seeks to add an employee ownership representatives to the ERISA Advisory Council. At the time of this recording, I'm unsure if there's been any motion on both of these acts, which were proposed last year, but I'm sure we'll learn more about that as the year progresses. So, taken together, these provisions really kind of show that the federal government already understands how powerful employee ownership can be. So what's missing is not, intent, it's just inclusion. Um, because employee ownership trusts deliver this like long-term stewardship-based, broad-based benefit structure that's like focused on durable local ownership. They kind of exist outside of the federal framework that was designed for more retirement plan based ownership. So as a result, EOTs are discouraged, not because they don't work, but because federal policy just simply hasn't caught up. Um, and we want to contrast this to the United Kingdom's Finance Act of 2014. Um, EOT, it's funny, EOTs are the preeminent model of employee ownership in the United Kingdom. Sort of outside of uh, our ecosystem here in the employee ownership space, you talk to anyone, when I share like with my family about like, the kind of research I do on employee ownership, they're like, oh, is that like cooperatives? Like that's what comes to mind. But in the UK, what comes to mind is employee ownership trusts, and that's kind of what we're striving for here. And a catalyst for this is inclusion at the federal level of stuff like the UK Finance Act of 2014, which um, gave business owners who sell a majority stake to an employee ownership trust, they have no capital gains tax, and employees can receive annual tax-free bonuses. Um, and I think maybe more subtly, uh, this provides a clear legal framework and a predictable sort of business environment. It establishes how a trustee operates, how the trust is enforced, um, and the results of inclusion and clarity at a level such as this shows in the data on the number of EOTs in the United Kingdom. Here is 2014 at the establishment of that law, and it's grown to just under 2,500 employee ownership trusts in 2025, which is just remarkable. Um, So, uh, the absence of sort of like a comparable federal framework in the United States, excuse me, makes EOTs harder to finance. It makes it harder to explain to sellers who are likely overwhelmed by um, the burden of exit anyway. And it's harder to scale, much harder to scale, even though they can deliver on a wide range of purpose and mission-driven benefits. So moving on to uh, Colorado and the Colorado policy landscape. Colorado is far ahead of many states. Um, the full report has much more details about the full breadth of policies and sort of the history of the symbiotic relationship between the EO movement and the state of Colorado. But for now, I just want to give a very high level um, representation of kind of like the heavy hitting policies that are doing a lot of work. Um, so HB 21-1311 formally defined an employee ownership trust, and it's the only sort of legal document that has has employee ownership trusts with their definition written in there. It defines an EOT as a trust that holds at least 20% of a qualified business and seeks to benefit employees on an equal basis, and we are going to problematize that in a minute. Um, the Colorado policies have also established generous tax credits that cover up to 50% of the new employee ownership business costs up to $50,000 through 2031. Um, this is capped at $40,000 for conversions to worker cooperatives or EOTs, and much higher for employee stock ownership plans, 150K for conversions of existing businesses to ESOPs. Um, the tax credits and their expansion have evolved and deepened over the years, which is a really positive signal for us in the employee ownership ecosystem. Um, I think it signifies that the state recognizes the importance of employee ownership as a counterweight to some of the broader economic trends that Minson touched on earlier, such as inequality, silver tsunami, consolidation of market power among the largest firms, and just the straight up inability of financial intermediaries to connect capital to small to mid-sized entrepreneurs. And it also recognizes the growing demand from the public for a new model of workplace equity. Moving on to the tax subtractions, sellers can subtract capital gains on the sale of at least 20% of a qualified business to an EOT, ESOP, or worker cooperative. And co-ops are now eligible for up to $1 million subtraction on their income tax. Colorado has done a good job of building out the technical infrastructure. Um, the OEdit has administers a revolving loan fund, and they also have an employee ownership office housed within OEdit, and they provide technical assistance, resources, data, lots of lovely things. And Colorado itself has a lot of like nonprofit technical assistant hubs that do a lot of really good work in this space as well. Um, and so uh, to go back to an earlier point about why maybe we have some issues with the definition of the employee ownership trust, is that we have a really good comparative model in Oregon that um, as opposed to what Colorado did by defining employee ownership trusts as it relates to tax law, uh, Oregon did something fundamentally different, and I think we have a lot to learn from Oregon in this regard. Oregon reformed its trust law to explicitly authorize what it calls stewardship trusts. And these trusts can exist for a business purpose. They can operate in perpetuity, and they can own corporations, partnerships, cooperatives, LLCs, etc. And they establish governance roles, including stewardship committees, trust enforcers, and it protects the trust assets from being dismantled simply because they exceed immediate needs. And this is one of the biggest barriers um, to opening up EOTs on a larger level is allowing them to hold considerable assets. Also getting around things such as the rule against perpetuities. And I think what really makes this matter is that Oregon, as opposed to kind of cramming, you know, the trust model of workplace democracy, workplace equity, mission-driven business, instead of trying to cram that into an existing, fragmented legal system, they sort of carved their own path by, creating a trust law that aligned with like the more modern, mission-driven forms of ownership, which I think is admirable. And then all the people who did work on the Oregon Stewardship Trust model deserve a round of applause for their work. Um, so broadly, the policy gaps, the key gaps that we want to emphasize are that EOTs are just outright excluded from federal employee ownership incentives. Trust law treatment is uneven across states. If the states have adopted the Uniform Trust Code, then we've got to look at the rule against perpetuities and see if the non-charitable purpose trusts are, exempt from the rule against perpetuities, or if it just extends the duration that the trust can exist. So it's very uneven trust law treatment. Capital access is definitely limited. Technical assistance and data infrastructure are thin. That's something that we learned doing a bunch of this research, was that there's not much out there on employee ownership trusts outside of the grassroots organizations that are doing a lot of the work to kind of produce information on these things. There's not many resources such as, tracking the performance, growth, etc. So that's certainly missing. There's no EOT specific grant fund, despite a network of employee ownership offices and nonprofits. There is a very weak legal definition. There isn't a trust law definition. There is simply a tax law uh, definition. And there's very limited resources for businesses who do want to transition to um, such a model. So with that in mind, our federal policy recommendations, our proposals are primarily about parity and not preference because remember earlier, I think it's important to stress that, employee ownership fits a lot of unique models of context. I think that the employee ownership trust is incredibly flexible, but it's important to not, kind of say this one is more important than the other. We think that at least parity with ESOPs is definitely crucial for their widespread adoption. And what this looks like is extending the capital gains tax deferral to employee ownership trust transitions. We want EOTs to be eligible S Corp shareholders so they get the same pass-through tax treatment that ESOPs do. Um, and we just generally want EOTs to be recognized as a tax advantage employee ownership entity, hopefully to engender more awareness and transitions. Um, this matters because this would dramatically lower the barrier of entry for a lot of exiting business owners, whether that's in the realm of knowledge and cost, especially for a lot of these small and mid-sized businesses. Only about 20% of the businesses that go to market actually are sold. The rest are just forced to close up shop, and the ones that do sell likely sell to private equity or an absentee corporate buyer. So we really want to broaden the options for these retiring business owners without creating many of the administrative burdens that sort of are involved with ESOPs. Um, and on the state level, it's first and foremost, it's most important that we clarify and clearly legitimize employee ownership trusts in state law and not just define them for those tax purposes. And this means, authorizing EOTs to own corporations, LLCs, partnerships, and cooperatives, clarifying the governance and accountability structures. In our full policy report, you'll hear about Clegg Auto, who I mentioned earlier. Um, they are trying to overcome a lot of the sort of regulatory burdens on, what the trust can acquire, what sort of entities the trust can acquire, um, because they're trying to use their trust as sort of the inversion of what we would recognize as private equity roll-ups. They're using their employee ownership trust to, take in these businesses and then, bring them into their equity model. Um, on the tax and procurement side, uh, we propose that raising the EOT conversion credit cap to at least $100,000 to bridge the gap between incentivizing EOTs and ESOPs. Uh, we want to expand income and corporate tax relief and offer preferential procurement for employee ownership trust firms. Um, we so the definition of EOTs at the moment is utterly lacking, and the umbrella ownership touches on Clegg's sort of model, um, because we want to clarify and create this business environment where things are predictable, knowable, and it incentivizes and kind of gives a business owners kind of the comfort and knowledge about what they're getting themselves into. Um, so with the preferential procurement strategies, there are models in Oregon and Maryland, and even some models provided by the Colorado Revised Statutes that provides purchasing preferences for sort of different communities and groups. And we think that this is a great way to sort of bring in employee ownership trusts and kind of give them a more competitive advantage. So taking after CRS 24-103-904, that provides a purchasing preference for environmentally preferable products. If we can do something like this where there's purchasing preference for employee ownership trusts, we think that this can sort of further incentivize um, owners to look at EOTs as a possible exit strategy. And over here is sort of the tax treatments that we've discussed. And expanding the ecosystem. So policy, in my mind, policy really has to be paired with infrastructure, including dedicated grant funding, technical assistance, and data collection. So EOTs aren't just like legally possible, but like practically achievable. And the way we want to go about doing this is we think that it'd be beneficial to fund state employee ownership offices or nonprofits to explicitly track key EOT metrics. And we can use those metrics to then evaluate and strengthen future policy because right now, all we have is a bunch of unknowns about EOTs. We have this idea and we have ideas from the United Kingdom and Canada, but we have no little to no infrastructure here in the United States that shows, successful strategies for EOT owners. We have very brave people in Utah, in California, who are, trying and really like through praxis kind of bringing this thing to life. But this can be buttressed by the rich ecosystem of employee ownership offices across the state, especially right here in Colorado. We think that establishing a dedicated EOT advisory grant fund um, would incentivize the adoption of EOTs so that the ecosystem grows, so that there are things to evaluate and we can learn more about this thing, help it grow. And we want to create a centralized knowledge and information hub. So this will essentially sort of supplement those knowledge gaps through digital EOT resources. So it can focus on things like a conversion checklist, best practices checklist, financial modeling, financing guidance, case studies, and links to resources across the country, which we tried to do in our full report. We've got the most exhaustive list of employee ownership resources available. Um, and we just want to create an environment that sort of fosters the growth of this movement, and that can include something like creating EOT friendly certifications for companies, advisors, and trustees, and ultimately adapting these policy proposals isn't about inventing like a new ownership model. It's about removing the fetters that prevent like proven people-centered business from scaling. So EOTs offer like a very unique way to keep businesses local, workers secure, and ownership aligned with long-term community benefit. And at the end of the day, policy really determines whether that potential remains marginal or becomes mainstream. Um, and now we'll turn it over to questions. If anyone has any questions, please feel free.
Just one thing is that, as you know, there are a lot of uh, growing movement right now. So EOT, as Ryan said, offers a lot of promising paths toward economic transformations. Right. But I think it is not technical per se. I think that policy work is also political. So then the question is how we're going to actually create that rooms for organizing the communities to create a new policy. And I think that that is also important to include all of these EO models, including an EOT. So that's kind of how we wrap up our report. So we'll open that up questions.
I have two questions actually. So I'm Ela. I'm from the North Carolina Employee Ownership Center. One of the things, Ryan, you'd said was having people track EOTs and metrics and data and all that. I have trouble with that because there's no way for us to know if there's an EOT unless it's word of mouth that or someone told us. There's no 5,500 that we can search. So that's one question. How would you propose that we figure these things out? We think we just got our second EOT in North Carolina, but there may be more, but I only know about two because that's what I've heard of. That's number one. Number two, we've been hearing that, oh, you should cite your trusts in Oregon or Delaware or other places that have these pretty solid perpetual trusts set up. But from what I understand from a local lawyer who has actually done these two and is working on a third EOT, is that the North Carolina law says it doesn't matter where your trust is cited. If your business is located in North Carolina law still rules. So it doesn't matter where you cite it. And so we're still stuck with limitations of the North Carolina Dynasty Trust, which can be, according to this attorney, carefully written to make it work for EOTs. That's not sustainable. He seems to know what that means. No other lawyer is going to be comfortable figuring out what carefully written dynasty trust means.
Yeah, no, I think to your first point that it's a major barrier, especially because there was one resource I found. It was a Harvard database that sort of tracked the existence of all types of employee ownership across the country. And when you go through there and you dig into it, a lot of those don't exist anymore. They're simply they either folded over COVID or they're now it was a form of an ESOP that's now been purchased by someone else and it doesn't exist as a employee ownership structure. I think that this can be I don't think it can be resolved. First of all, I don't think it can be fully resolved. I do think though that what can be helped is like the state and these technical assistant hubs can deepen their relationship and kind of really have the resources to have like a grassroots mobilization where you can send out surveys and be like, um, send out like surveys to employee-owned businesses that you are aware of in the state, and you can detail those surveys like, who else is an employee-owned company that you know of, and then maybe do it through the grassroots way. But I think that remains kind of the one of the biggest challenges, especially because it's so new and it's a burgeoning movement that you know if we can't have the resources to track and learn about these things, we might not know of successful strategies being employed across the country right now that could use scaling. So I think that is one of the challenges to overcome. I think there's ways to sort of quell those issues, but not entirely overcome them. And then your question about the carefully written and sort of trusts question. That's just like yeah, a lot of the research is that comes from lawyers has a lot of sort of like language like that within it that, does sometimes go over my head, but I think it goes back to, I mean, Susan Gary was the principal lawyer and advocate of the Stewardship Trust in Oregon. Um, and basically throughout her work, there's this like line of like, this thing needs to be formally established, like where the company is situated, and like this thing needs to be brought to life, like and firmly deny and thoroughly defined so that you can escape situations where people use carefully written trust law to sort of benefit these non-equity structures. So, like by having a clear trust definition and legal definition, I think we can, maybe get around some of those things that and prevent, like another Standard Oil situation. But yeah, I appreciate your questions.
Thank you.
I can voice the question. I just hit it in the chat, and I'd just like to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on the advisory grant fund. And as I say, all things being equal, what really can you envision for it? Like, what's your wish list for it if the status isn't already in a limiting direction, so to say?
That's a good question. A wish list for the grant fund. I mean, at the end of the day, anything that fosters sort of like knowledge awareness, I think it would be huge because I think first and foremost, there's just no awareness about what this thing is, especially as it pertains to Colorado. Sorry that my analysis will be like heavily Colorado centered, so apologies to any folks outside of Colorado. But around there's not enough knowledge here, so I think that like first and foremost, it's important that we have the support to sort of disseminate the information that we have already, so that we can start doing things like have these. Uh, Templates for best practices, trust deed templates, and then maybe once we have those things, the EOT advisory grant fund could be used for something like legal services. Um, uh, I think there's stuff that needs to happen before the EOT advisory grant fund, but I think that there's an unlimited sort of answers to that question because of what an EOT can be. I don't know. Minson, did you have any ideas about this?
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously, in number one, I think we are facing a challenge of the fact that not many people actually know about EOTs. But, having said that, actually, EOTs are growing rapidly. We started with like a one or two, and now actually we have a more than, 46 EOTs in the nations right now. And, a lot of EO centers are heavily advertising and promoting this model as well. I think when it comes down to sort of a seeking grant, one powerful message that I find from EOT is that it is a really mission-driven company. If you as a business owner just wants to profit and maximize the profit, EOT is not the models that you're going to go to. But some of the organic grown company and other cases, if you really look at their story, founder stories, it came from the fact that their company, the founder didn't want their company to be sold and then lose that momentum and the mission. And that's why we keep emphasizing that this could be a very powerful way to convert a company that is mission driven, right? And I think we can tie the mission driven purposes to seeking grant, because then we can actually find a lot of companies that may be closed, but it may be continued with this kind of EOT models. So.
I suppose that's in part where I see the opportunity with something like an advisory grant fund, that instead of it being about the grant fund, it is about actually supporting the missions of all the different people in all the disparate communities that are having to solve problems on their own without knowing the work of all of you and all of us, that is trying to generate more tools to make the work easier, so that the non-silo effect is less about the fund or the money or the commodity that's separate from the people involved in the mission. And so I'm really excited for that commitment, to see that commitment, And I'm really interested to see how that then is also a practice of the investment of walking the talk and having that return to support and fund all of those missions moving forward. I think it's great. I'm really encouraged. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one example is actually New Belgium. I mean, that's absolutely a typical case, right? Hundreds of workers own that company as an ESOP company. But when actually the Kirin, a multinational corporation, came, the trust actually decide to go with that one. Why? Because that's their role to go with whatever the maximize profit needs to be secure. However, with the EOT, that disappeared. The pure purpose of this EOT is to keep your mission, right? So that's why I think we have a little bit different kind of EOT that cares about the community, right? And to make sure that it is not only about the current employees, right? Your company exists for the future employees as well. So that's why I think we mark that bold future employees. So don't only think about the current employees' benefit. Of course, it's a good idea to give them the maximizations of all the profits, but don't forget how we want to continue this mission for long term. And I think that the characteristic of that perpetuity in model is really, really appealing for us. So I think for us, I think we are looking into sort of the model of UK, right? And there is no tax benefit at the federal levels, state levels. Colorado and a few are starting to introduce those policies. But if we know about the power of this EOT, more states will come up with a different policies, right? Colorado, for example, will start actually providing that tax default tax benefit starting 2031 for selling owners, including for EOT conversion. That is very powerful. And I think we can try that in different states. So again, I think it is related to sort of the trust law that is not really a little bit difficult to do it at the federal level now. But, if we can kind of look at many different countries' models, I think there is a possibility. And with all these pioneers, right, who brought this model to the United States in, early 2010s and, whatnot, I think we have a hope. Right, I think there is a way that we can continue to have more of EOTs, and I think especially the creating a federal law policy at the state and the federal level is really critical by just looking into how fast actually UK grew its EOT presence, and it's a very remarkable.
Hi, I have just a kind of a question on the policy recommendation of reducing the property tax burden for EOTs. And I'm kind of approaching this from when I served in government. And this is obviously coming from a Montana perspective as well. And it is a struggle for local governments to raise the dollars that they need to provide the services for their communities. And the only way they can do that is through property tax. So I'm just a little curious as to what the thought process behind that was, and do you think then that could eventually affect states adopting some good policies for EOTs?
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it's a sort of the ideas, right? I mean, again, this is a sort of the proposals that, actually states could provide some sort of the reduced property taxes for employee-owned businesses. Again, it's a kind of a scenario. Wouldn't that be nice? And because they are actually employee-owned businesses that actually benefit the community in broader terms. So again, I think, I don't see any sort of the state that has implemented this, but, this is one of the options that, might be very helpful in the future. Ryan, do you have?
Yeah, well,
yeah,
and I think Mansoon, it kind of ties to what you said that the EOT is a bit of a mission driven
Mhm.
uh, business model, ownership model. And then I think Ryan, you had in one of your charts where one of the benefits could be the charitable giving back to a community. So I think you could tie that message all together if I'm understanding his
yeah.
direction on that.
No,
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. I think your question is really important, especially because as folks who believe in sort of workplace democracy, that Venn diagram is a circle for people who believe that, government should have the money to provide essential services for their citizens. So whenever we're kind of stuck asking for either, tax credits, tax cuts, which is kind of like can be seen as a contradictory movement. However, there is a lot of really important research done out there about local multiplier effects of employee ownership companies that maybe can offset some of those. And again, this is a policy proposal, but the local multiplier effect circulates up to 3 times the money that absentee corporate chains do. So, if there is a more robust ecosystem of EOTs and they're all receiving those property taxes, it's likely that that money is going to stay local anyway and find its way back into public coffers one way or another. But I definitely understand the concern about those seemingly contradictory things. But again, like you mentioned, the EOTs are really focused on mission, and I really implore everyone to check out Clegg Auto in Utah. Um, they do a lot of community-driven spending through their employee ownership trust, and I think back to an earlier question about what an advisory grant fund could look like is, Clegg sets aside stuff for employee education. The United States is very unique in that it kind of kicks people into the workforce after 4 years of like secondary or post-secondary education and says, good luck. Um, Clegg is reinstituting, lifelong education, and they're funding that through their employee ownership trust. They've given money back to their communities. One of their, customers had their house burned down, and one of the employees who is now in an elevated position because of the trust came to the folks at Clegg and said, hey, can we use some of this money to help out that person? Like they've been a loyal customer for years. So like these are the advantages that are funneled immediately back into the community, which is what makes EOT such a remarkable uh, um, form of employee ownership.
Mhm. Elias?
Yeah, first of all, congratulations to Minson and Ryan for doing this. This is super helpful. And from the little bit I knew about EOTs, the cool thing I thought of right away is what you were talking about a moment ago. They can't be demutualized. So this just takes off the table that problem that we've always known about in the co-op world, no more New Belgium kind of thing. The other thing that's kind of interesting about them is that I knew a little bit about the way they have been around in Europe, for example, for a long time. And they are, from an era where people didn't talk so much about mission as they did about the culture. So, in an American business culture, there's so much turnover and churn, and there's never much cultural memory in the business or loyalty to a corporate culture, if you could even define what that corporate culture is. But this is a way to recover that. And in the way you were just describing, Ryan, the business can really kind of root itself in the community in a much deeper way than usually it's done. So that's an awesome tool to be able to have, and I hope good things will come up. So thank you for sharing all this good info.
Yeah. Just, I'm sorry, we missed the question by Steve. Did you look into the new EOT policy in Canada? And if so, do you see anything that they put in place that the US should also do?
Yes. A lot of our our policy recommendations, we took a note from our friends in the north and our friends across the pond. They're really doing great things in this sphere that we can replicate given our present material and political circumstances. But yes, absolutely, we're definitely looking to them to kind of help guide us in this charting our own path. Yeah.
Okay, so it's almost time's up. So yeah, our copy is actually available also by EOX, and now we're gonna put it on our website, so you should be able to download it. But Steve, would you like to kind of talk about this sort of policy work, maybe, and how would you like to promote this research? You're not there? I don't know. Okay. All right, so thank you so much, everybody, for coming to these presentations, and thank you, and have a great day. And you can reach out to us at rmeoc.org, and yeah, if you need any sort of the copy, we are happy to send it to you. So please send an email over to info@rmeoc.org. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.